In a world that's always racing forward, sometimes we need to slow down and reconnect.
Connect genuinely, broaden your perspective, and share your passion.
Bona fide dialogues, where authenticity, creativity, and passion merge.
Okay, welcome to Bona Fide Dialogues, David.
Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Dave Keane is the author of over 20 books for children, including the Joe Sherlock Kid Detective series, which he wrote and illustrated for HarperCollins. He's also known for several popular picture books, including Bobby Bramble Loses His Brain, Sloppy Joe, Who Wants a Tortoise, and his latest, The Treasure Box, published by G.P. Putnam's Sons. His books have been translated into many languages, including Dutch, French, Chinese, and Vietnamese. He is currently finishing his first middle grade novel, The Experiencers, First Contact, a spooky sci-fi mystery. He has visited schools all across the country and received countless letters and emails from parents, teachers, and kids from around the world. As the middle son of 7 brothers, Dave grew up in a bustling house in San Jose, California, where there was never a dull moment. Dave always enjoyed drawing, old movies, and comic books as a kid. He attended San Diego State University and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in English. He was not a big book reader as a child, but caught the reading bug while a college student. After college, Dave found his creativity, sense of humor, and ample imagination to be valuable assets as a copywriter and creative director working in advertising and marketing. Dave came to children's books after spending many hours reading books to his 3 kids. He now lives with his wife, Christina, their dog, Fiona, and a very bossy tortoise named Shelly. To learn more about Dave and his books, visit davekeane.net.
First of all, I wanted to talk about your childhood. I know that our professional journeys often begin in our childhood. Can you talk a little bit about your childhood?
Yes. Well, I grew up in San Jose, California, with 6 brothers. So there were 7 Keane boys. So there was never a dull moment. It was usually chaos, but it was always fun. There was always something going on, a card game, wiffle ball, sock fights, you name it. It was just a really fun environment to grow up in. But, I always thought of myself as being the creative brother. I loved to draw when I was little. And
I can't even imagine growing up in the family of 7 boys.
Yes, my poor mother. It was always a mess. We weren't tidy either, so.
I'm from the family of 1. I'm only child.
Yeah, hard to imagine, huh?
But I had cousins. My aunt, my father's sister, she had 4 children. So I was part of their family. I was visiting them and didn't want to go home. Then my parents would come pick me up. I would hide under the bed. So I really wanted to be part of their family. It was a lot of fun. So I can imagine.
Yeah, and it's just
good, but it can be like, did you get enough attention?
Oh, never. I think that's probably why I was always trying to be the funny one. I think all of us tried to be the funny one and always trying to get laughs and attention. But, a great way to grow up. In fact, I couldn't imagine just being an only sibling. I had a friend whose name was Lance. He was an only child. And I used to go over to his house and it seemed like a museum. It was, just very quiet and tidy and our house was kind of chaos. But it was a great, great way to grow up. And a lot of, I visit a lot of schools and kids always say, what books did you love to read as a kid? And when I think back, I don't remember reading a lot as a kid. I remember I was into comic books. I read a lot of comic books as a kid, but I don't remember spending a lot of time reading books, but I was really imaginative. I mean, back then, times are different now. It was a lot of playtime. You imagine mom with 7 kids, in the summer, she didn't want us in the house. So we spent a lot of time just outdoors, making things up, playing sports, just trying to make up stuff to do. So it was a very imaginative, creative kind of way to grow up.
When did you write your first book? Was it in your
Well,
childhood or
no,
later on?
never occurred to me. So I was an English major. I started out as an acting major in college. I served a
Mm.
2 year sentence as an acting major in college, and then I switched to English because I kind of fell in love with reading when I was in college. So I didn't in high school didn't read much. I read what I had to, but never read a book like for fun. I read it like most people because you're forced to read it. But when I was in college, I sort of fell in love with books and just really went, down the rabbit hole and loved to read and just fell in love with reading. So after I graduated from college, my first job was at an advertising agency as a copywriter. So, I was very creative. I like to draw still. I was, a lot of kids stopped drawing around the fourth or fifth grade, but I never stopped. I cartooned and drew like crazy in my notes through, high school and college. I should have been listening, but I was drawing cartoons in class. So my first job was in advertising, and in school, creativity isn't, there's no creativity class. A lot of school is, and it's still this way because I've seen it through my three kids, is,
Unfortunately.
here's 20 words, memorize these and, know the
Yeah.
definition on Friday. So it was a lot of memorization and, probably things I wasn't as good at, but I was very creative, but there's no way to express your creativity in
Yeah.
school. They want you to sit still and, answer the questions. So in my first professional jobs is really where, creativity suddenly felt like my superpower,
Mm.
where people would, working on an ad and they had a couple of ideas for a headline and they say, Dave, can you write some new headlines for this ad in a magazine? And I would, take 30, 45 minutes and write 100 different headlines. And people were like, where did you get all these? I go, I don't know. They just come out.
That's
So, and it was the
amazing.
first time where creativity seemed valuable to me. And,
Mhm.
um,
And
and
doing
so I
it for a
kind of,
living, it's amazing, right? To have the
yeah,
opportunity to express yourself the way
right.
feels natural to you and be
Uh,
paid for that.
yeah, it is. It's a great way to make a living. So I've been mostly, my day job has always been in advertising and marketing and have sort of made a living of cooking up ideas and being creative, especially with words. Um, in fact, eventually, I worked a lot of advertising agencies, doing everything from TV commercials and radio commercials to print ads, everything you could possibly do. And then I worked on client side. I worked for big companies as the kind of creative team in-house. So
Mm.
I've always sort of done that for a living. But the to circle back on how I got into to writing books, it never really occurred to me until when our first child was born. This is like 25 plus years ago. Our daughter was born, and we were moving to a new house, and my wife, Christine, had the great idea, hey, let's not hook up the TV and we'll just spend all our time focusing on the baby,
I
which,
like that.
I kind of said, okay. I don't think I thought it through that well, but really hard to be a sports fan with no television. Um, and then we subsequently had three kids. We never hooked up the TV. So we went 12, 13 years without a TV in the house. So we just kind of created this book culture where,
Mm.
three weekly trips to the library and just spent a lot of time reading books to my kids and sort of, kind of fell in love with children's books. And that's sort of where I kind of had the first inkling, maybe I could do this. Um, so
Yeah,
especially for like,
going to the bookstore is a special time with my children too. It's such a
yeah,
special place and library.
just
So
magical,
yeah,
right?
magical.
And we used to bring, our thing was we bring home 25 books for each kid. And, if
Mhm.
you only liked five of them, that was okay, but
Mhm.
you never want to bring just one or two because if they don't, if
Yeah, they get
they don't
excited.
work,
They
then,
want it all. Yeah.
so we had a crazy, influx of books at our house, but it was a really fun environment. So that's how I fell in love with writing book. And because at work, one of the things when you're a copywriter, if you have to, like these days, I've been writing commercials for, Toyota and McDonald's. And
Mm.
if you have 30 seconds in a radio commercial to write a script, there has to be an economy of words. You have to tell a story very quickly. And that turned out to be a really useful skill in writing for children's books because
Yeah.
typical picture book, as you know, it probably has between 600 and 1,000 words now. So it sounds like a
It still can be difficult to keep their attention, right?
very tough. And you can't say everything you want to say. You have to choose every word very carefully. And I think copywriting was good training for that kind of work. So I announced one day to my wife that, I think I'm gonna write children's books. And I don't know what she thought of that, but she was
I'm
supportive.
sure she was supportive.
It was sort of like, because it seems like such a lofty goal. It's like, I want to be a professional baseball player, or, I
Yeah.
want to play in the orchestra, having never played an instrument before. But I sort of dove in and really committed myself to first, studying authors and how people became authors and how they, worked and came up with ideas and how they sold their books. So I really did a lot of research before I started writing my own books. And I still remember finishing my first little picture book manuscript that felt like a big accomplishment. I was like, wow, I wrote a book, So, and then from there, it just took off.
I think many parents feel like this. They read a book and they're like, "Oh, I can do better," right? And they write a book,
Yes.
but that's it. That starts with one book and it ends with one book. But
Yeah.
for you, it's been a journey of more
Right.
than 20 years.
And the one thing I've learned too is like it's for me now, it's not so hard to write a book or come up with an idea for a book. It's very hard to sell a book. Like,
Mm.
I have a lot more ideas and a lot more manuscripts than I do sales. So it's a little bit like writing a movie. Once you write the movie, someone's got to produce it. It's very hard to get everything aligned. The stars have to align. You have to get
It's
funding.
not like you have an agent and now any book you write, it will be sold. No,
Yes,
it's
I
not.
thought that's how it was going to work, but it did not work that way.
Interesting.
So, you know, I started sending out some manuscripts early on, and I happened to meet an author, a children's book author, through our local bookstore. Her name is Karen Beaumont. She was a local author, and I kind of asked the bookstore, "Hey, I would love to meet her." I had seen some signed books, and they said, "Oh, she lives locally." And I said, "Wow, I'd love to meet an." I had never met an author before, so I was sort of like, "Gee whiz, how cool."
Yeah, yeah.
And she was really very kind and read some of my stories and was super helpful. In fact, she invited me to some of her writers groups. A lot of writers have a little group where they meet and read each other's
Get
manuscripts.
feedback. Yeah.
A lot of mutual support, and you get leads for agents. And that's through that group is, through those leads, I ended up getting my first agent in New York, which was really exciting. But it certainly helped to have sort of like, this author recommended I call you, and it really helped sort of get started because I had been under the impression that you just write a book and send it to publishers and then they pick you out of the slush pile and then nowadays it's agents work as the sort of gatekeeper to the publisher. It's very hard to sell directly into a publisher.
Yeah.
So
But you write your own books and you illustrate your own books. So
I
that
do
may be
sometimes.
helpful,
Yeah.
right?
I don't always illustrate my books. It varies a lot. So,
How do
uh,
you decide which book would you
well,
decide to illustrate yourself and this one should not? Is it your decision or your agent's decision?
it can be the publisher. So like originally I was writing picture books. So I started out, I had an agent. I was like, wow, I've made it to the big time. We're going to Disneyland, but nothing sold. And I had maybe 4 or 5 manuscripts. We were sending them out, and my agent was, saying we had no luck. So I was like, okay, this
Mm.
is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And she had suggested I write a chapter book, which is,
Mm.
first, second, third grade kind of a book. And I had
Yeah.
most of that research I had done was for writing picture books.
Yeah.
So I kind of, without doing much research, I just gave it a shot, and I wrote a book about a kid detective named Joe Sherlock.
Yeah.
Um, and I sent it to my agent, and she said, wow, this is different, and maybe we could sell this. And that ended up selling at an auction. An auction is when several publishers express
Mm.
interest, and you have an auction. Whoever bids the highest wins the rights to the book. So my first sale wasn't like the way I'd imagined it for a single picture book, it was a 4 book deal for a chapter book series, having only written one, not
Yeah, it's a
knowing what I
great
was
book,
doing.
and I like the unique style of your illustrations.
Yeah, and so with that one, my agent said, yeah, and you could, black and white illustrations, they call them spot illustrations. So the story isn't told with big colorful illustrations, but they're more like little small half-page illustrations that guide, young readers through the story. And she said you could do so the publisher said, well, send us along some illustrations. And I hadn't really prepared for that. So using my kids' watercolors and pens and things, I kind of said, okay, now I'm going to have to really figure out what these characters look like and quickly.
You didn't have them in mind already,
Not
then the book?
exactly. And I kind of had to figure out how to draw them simply and repeatedly. What's funny about that series is usually in those books, the illustrations just depict what's happening in the story. So kids who are struggling to read can look at the picture and they can kind of figure out what some tougher word. I didn't really do it that way. I just drew like things that the character was imagining, or I was sort of making the illustrations little jokes. And, luckily they thought that was different and creative. Mostly it was just I didn't know what I was doing. And
That's what I love about your books, that you have so much humor in them. I was
yes.
rereading this book this morning. I was laughing. I couldn't stop.
Yes, Bobby Bramble loses his brain. It's so that was the first picture book. So I ended up,
Yeah,
yes, I finally sold a picture book, and Bobby Bramble was my first sale. Funny story about that
it's
is
very funny. Yeah.
that was the first book. A lot of writers, especially starting writers, send in their manuscripts to book comp or manuscript competitions. So Writer's Digest has an annual, competition, and I sent that manuscript in, and it hadn't sold yet, and it won first prize. So I was the only, I figured
It
once
won
you
the
win,
prize. Oh, that's
once you win, you should never enter another contest to be disappointed. So
illustrated by David Clark. Illustrations are great too.
yes,
I like it.
what's funny is that was my first picture book, and I had really no idea what the pictures looked like until the very end. So in my head, I had imagined it a certain way.
Yeah, and then you
Looked
saw it looks
totally
completely
different.
different, but
It was very
amazing, right?
strange. Yeah. It
Yeah.
doesn't always work that way, but with that one, it was particularly different. But I thought it was terrific. And as you know, if you've read it, it's very silly and
It
the language is sort
is.
of elevated and goofy. It's very much my sense of humor.
Yes, yes, and I can imagine kids and parents both can laugh, by
Yeah.
reading this book.
And the seed for that is probably, my dad with 7 brothers always getting into trouble. He used to say, "You're going to fall down and crack your head open." And that was probably the seed of that book. So
I
I
think
thought,
people are a lot of authors like trying to put some important message in it,
yeah,
and it becomes boring,
yeah.
you know? So that's why I really enjoy it. So, what was the message of this book? Because I know people can think about the main idea in this book in different ways.
Yeah.
Some
Well,
people would just say that just put the helmet on. That's the main
yeah.
lesson. But
For people who haven't read it, it's about a boy whose name is Bobby Bramble, and he has 2 sisters, a lot like my son, and has 2 sisters. And he's very good at jumping and climbing and sliding and somersaulting. And one day he falls and his brain pops out and runs away. So it runs around the neighborhood, and the whole family is trying to get his brain back to put back into his skull. One of the rules they say about children's books is, the best stories don't have sort of a message. We're not trying to teach anybody anything. Some books do have sort of an underlying message. Honestly, for this book, a lot of people say, well, this book is about, wearing your helmet and being safe and stuff like that.
yeah.
But or I was just interested in telling a silly, goofy kind of tall,
It is.
someone with a wandering mind.
Yes, yes, that's a great book. Is it still for sale? Or people can find
That's a
it in
pretty
the
old book.
libraries only?
Yeah, it's in quite a few libraries. It's probably out of print now. I think that was
Mm.
2009. I can't even remember
Yeah,
when
I
that
just
was.
signed it for my children years ago.
Oh, wow,
Yeah,
that's terrific.
yeah, it's wonderful.
Um, yeah,
And I
because
have
books.
another one here. This one.
Oh, yeah. So storm chasing, I ended up writing a couple of books
For Disney Pixar.
for Pixar,
How
and that
that
was a great
happened.
experience.
Sounds like interesting story behind it.
Yeah, and that was my agent got word that Pixar was looking for someone to write, for Cars 3, but how when movies come out, there's also, so that was a chapter book. And what was fun about that is I got to see them working on the movie. So I saw a very early version of the movie and got to see the movie progress. And they really let me, they wanted the origin stories of, Jackson Storm and, all the characters. So that was really fun. They gave me a lot of leeway to kind of make up what I wanted. Uh, it turned out to be somewhat difficult because the Cars characters, when you write, you express things like he waved his hand or he smacked his forehead or,
Yeah.
he fell over laughing. But when they're cars, they have no arms and
Yeah.
it was really challenging to have expression, because they didn't have bodies. They had,
But did
cars.
you have a lot of freedom to write for them, or they're kind of controlling you and giving you feedback? Was it like more hands-on from
It
Pixar and
was
Disney, or
no, it was surprisingly they gave me a lot of freedom. It was pretty fun. I think they wanted to know like what was my idea, and we kind of worked out the kind of big idea. But they pretty much let me kind of go through. The one thing I do remember with writing for the Cars books was a lot of the technical details. In racing, they would say, well, the the racing coach would never do this, or you can't have a pit stop, or that happens.
Mm,
That's more of a maintenance thing. And so they were very rigid about the
detailed,
details
yeah.
of racing. And these are talking cars, but they were pretty strict about, certain things, but they gave me a lot of leeway with the characters and the dialogue, and they were really fun and challenging books to write. But there's a lot of Cars fans out there.
Mm.
So
But
I heard a lot.
generally speaking, how do you come up with ideas for your books?
It varies. Mostly if you start paying attention, I like to say there's ideas happening, all around you all the time.
Mm.
Um, I
Just
wrote a book.
ability to see it,
Yeah, and it's because I
magic
do
of
it
the
so
author.
much, at work, like I'm always listening for, oh, that's a funny phrase or that's a funny picture. And you kind of can use that. So, you know, a lot of those things you just kind of pay attention to. I think a lot of people aren't looking for ideas, so they don't, once you activate your brain to be looking out, like one day
Mm.
I said to my son, I said, wow, look at how messy your room is. Who are you, Sloppy Joe? And I said, oh, what a funny idea. And I'm named for a book. So I ended up writing a book called Sloppy Joe, a picture book about a
So
kid
some
who,
of your books are inspired by your children, huh?
yeah. And even when I write, I can, sometimes I have one of my kids, voices in my head as I'm writing the character
Mm.
voice.
So you can relate to how children think.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
kind of the syntax of how they talk or the way they think is really useful. I think like in my first book, the Joe Sherlock series, Joe Sherlock was just sort of me shrunk. He has all kind of similar problems that I have, but he's allergic to tree nuts like my son is, and
Mm.
I just kind of grab different things,
Things
but
from everywhere.
it's 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 pretty fun. Um, right now, I've just finishing my first middle grade novel, which is
Mm.
so if a picture book is 600 to 1,000 words, and a chapter book is maybe 10,000 to 12,000 words,
This is
middle
where
grade
you're
book,
going to get really famous. It's very
yeah,
hard to get famous
we'll
for
see.
picture books, right?
It hasn't sold yet. Yeah,
No.
it's very hard to become famous as an author. But a middle grade book is, I think this one's around 50,000 words. So each one is so different, just to have so much room and to keep the pace moving. And so each one's a different kind of challenge. Um,
Now
but in
your
that one,
kids
it's
grew up and your books are growing up with them, huh?
yeah, I've heard that happens, and that's probably true. And it's just been an interesting challenge to write something that long and to keep it interesting. But I think it's working out pretty well. So right now, I've had two previous literary agents, and right now I don't have a literary agent. My last agent and I parted ways after 10 or 12 years. This is during the pandemic. So now I need to get a new agent and I need to finish this book, sort of land my third and maybe final agent, who knows.
How long
So
have you been writing this book? How long have you been working on it?
kind of off and on.
Yeah.
I started during the pandemic. Originally, it started out as a werewolf book and it just wasn't working. And now it's a book about UFOs.
Oh, I
So
love that.
uh, it's essentially about a boy who moves to a new town and he lives next to a big, state park with a big mountain and woods. So he lives right next to the woods for the first time and he sees lights in the woods and so he's seeing UFOs and he has to investigate and
Don't tell us everything. Don't
yeah,
tell it. But sounds very interesting. I can't wait to read it.
the title right now is The Experiencers, but
So what
um,
age is this book from?
so middle grade would be kids like fifth, sixth, seventh grade. There's kind of a wider range for those kind of books.
Yeah.
But there's usually no pictures. This is someone who could read that kind of length book. After middle grade, this is probably upper middle grade, which is the
Yeah.
characters, seventh grade, eighth grade, and then you move into YA, young adult books,
Mhm.
which you can, write about more intense experiences and more teen type books.
Mhm.
So middle grade's
So
kind
do you use any AI tools in your
I
writing
don't.
now?
I don't. I'm interested in AI just as a sort of cultural phenomenon. I think it's so new. In fact, I have started looking for agents, and a lot of agents ask if you want to send them a manuscript, was AI used in any part of writing this book? And I
That's a
think
good
if you check
question.
that box, they don't want to see it for whatever reasons. It's kind of a new territory legally, I think, who owns the rights to something that
Yeah.
AI created. I have to tell you that I asked AI to write a scene, a 6 paragraph scene from my Joe Sherlock series. And I kind of gave a quick scenario and it wrote the scene and it was eerily similar to the Joe Sherlock books. So that was kind of wild. Like
It is.
we're moving into a sort of a brand new
Yeah.
era,
Yeah.
I think, of what AI is going to be used for. I mean, there's a meme, I don't know if you've seen it, where it goes, I want AI to do my laundry and the dishes so I can do my art and writing. And I don't want AI to do my writing and my art, so all I do is my laundry and my dishes. So what is AI going to do? And I think AI is going to be really good at writing books and even,
And illustrating too.
and illustrating too. It's I know the writer's strike in LA was about this very topic. How much can people use AI to write TV series, and where does the writer end and the computer
Yeah.
begin?
Yeah. I feel
It's
like if you use it as a tool, kind of collaborating, right?
yeah,
There's a lot of input from you. So you're kind of directing it. This is one scenario, but then you just say, you write a prompt and AI creates a story. That's a completely different scenario. I really kind of subconsciously don't want us to get there. I still
yeah,
want us to have control over this writing process so we can keep some soul, something
yes.
human
It
in
reminds
it.
me of I don't know if you know Tim Burton. He's a movie director. He did Edward Scissorhands and The Nightmare Before
Mm,
Christmas, and Um, he has a very distinct aesthetic look. He was an illustrator trained at Disney, but he always looked different from the Disney characters and went on to have this amazing career. But all his characters, all his movies have that same kind of look and feel. And I think BuzzFeed had an article once where they redrew all the Disney characters as Tim Burton would make them in a
mm,
movie. And I remember he said it was like a robot, you know, sucking out your humanity. It was a very
yeah.
odd experience for him because, he felt like
It's
his
his
creativity had been,
style, yes, his
yeah.
signature. And
So,
your
and I think there's even,
illustrations have your signature in it. Like they're very recognizable.
yeah. And I think it's possible for AI to, write stories in the
In
voice
your
of,
voice, yeah.
yeah, any voice like Stephen King or, you name the author. I think it can do that. So I think we're kind of early on in how fast the technology is changing. I'm reading a book right now called Nexus by, I think his name is Yuval Harari. Uh, I'm not sure if I have that right, but it's about AI and different ways we communicate. And he likes to say AI is it's a tool, but it's also an agent. You can tell it to think up a book and it'll do it. It doesn't even need prompts. It can
Yeah.
be creative. And so I think over time we'll have to catch up to the technology and maybe put some guardrails on who owns what and how
Yeah.
much, your ideas or your creative style can be used to,
Yeah, definitely you should protect your rights as an author.
yeah. And, it'd be, I'm really curious to see what happens because, the technology, my wife and I talk about this a lot, how different,
Mm,
we both grew up in San Jose in the 70s, 1970s, and, what our childhoods were like. And, now kids are so different. Like,
yeah.
if you look at technology, like social media was the promise of, oh, being able to connect, through social platforms. But really, in the end, it's sort of separated people into little silos where they just live through their screen and people don't really get together
Yeah.
anymore. And
The
the
goal was connecting,
nature,
but we
yeah, of our,
created this
yeah, and our
lonely
culture and
lonely
society.
society.
Yes. So there's sort of unintended consequences, and AI is definitely one of those that we have
Yeah.
to keep an eye on.
I
And
think one of the important points somebody mentioned on my podcast is the fact that the art and books, writing, creating music, it's not only about the final product, about how good it is, it's about the process we as humans enjoy.
right,
You
right. And
know, it's like that brings so much joy to your life working on it, right? And you don't want it to be taken from you.
yeah, it really does. I think that, I'll be honest, I've been frustrated writing this middle grade novel because I've sort of been clumsy about it and, it hasn't gone as smoothly as I want it to be. So I get frustrated and why isn't this easier? But, you learn through the effort and the journey. And, I saw, there have been a couple of times I'm like, maybe I should just put it in a drawer and start something new. But I really want to get it to the point where it's as good as I can make it and
Mm,
sort of feel like it's completed. I saw somewhere there's a saying that when you want to quit the most is how you know you're almost at the finish,
there, yeah.
something like that.
Yeah,
So I've just sort of said, well, I've enjoyed it. I really love like all these characters. Once you're writing a book like that, seem like real people in your head.
yeah,
And there's something fun about moving the players, the pieces around the board and trying to make it as fun. And, I always try to make it like a book that I would like to read at that age.
yeah.
Uh, so I won't give you the big result at the end, the big surprise ending. But you're right. It's how do you
It's
tell
never
stories?
feels like it's done, right?
It
Somebody
never
has to
does.
take it from you.
Yeah,
It's like no
that's
more.
very true. Sometimes you just have to ship it, and it's just as good as it's going to be. But
Is your
you know,
wife reading it, or who is like the first person who can lay their eyes on
yeah,
it?
usually, I used to use my kids quite a bit. They're not around as much anymore, but obviously my wife would read stuff. But I've always found it's never good to have, share
Family
if you're
members.
writing a story and you're new at it, don't have anybody read it. Have
Mm,
someone who can appreciate, the effort or it's just you got to be careful because it's sort of a delicate thing. And if someone goes, yeah, oh yeah, I don't get it, that's confusing. It can really be sort of crushing and
yeah,
so you've got to choose who you're going to show things to, that they'll say the right things like, well, it's coming along, it's better, I can see what you're going at. This is going to be really exciting. Not everybody's good at giving notes. So,
constructive feedback. Yes,
yes,
something
yes.
helpful. There are no cartoons or movies are done based on your books yet, no?
No, I know some writers who have had their books turned into
Mhm.
movies. things.
Is
But
that something you would want, or you never consider?
yeah, I think that would be really fun.
You have amazing characters. I can imagine
Yeah,
in cartoon.
I think it's pretty rare for that to happen. But of course, there's a lot of money in that. Of course, I wouldn't say no. A lot of people think like it's funny because I've always had day jobs where I'm working somewhere and I
Yeah.
don't really talk about being an author very much. And I've maybe published 25 books or so, or getting close to 25. And when people hear you're an author, they think, wow, you must make so much money. But there's really not a whole lot of money being an author. For most authors, don't really make that much money. But when your book is turned into, a
Yeah.
Netflix series or a, major movie, that can be really lucrative. So no, it's not happened yet. And, I certainly wouldn't
Yeah. So
mind.
you're open
It'd
to
be
that.
fun.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Especially that one about UFOs sounds very interesting.
We'll see. I know just already the middle grade market is tough and science fiction middle grade is, if I could pick any genre that I should write in, that would be probably not the one to pick just because it's very hard to get sales in that, category.
So
But
strange. I would think opposites.
yeah, you would think
Yeah.
but in the end you have to, uh, when ideas pop up, for me at least, I feel like that's the book something is telling me to write. So
Yeah,
that's
you
the book
don't
to focus on.
write based on the market, what is needed, what is
Exactly.
sellable. You write what feels right for you.
Even the many books I've written that didn't sell, it was still the idea and I still wrote it. And, if it sells or not, it doesn't matter. You wrote the book, the idea you had and made it as good as you can make it. So that's sort of part of the process, so they don't all sell. And we'll see if this one ever sells. But there's other ideas down the road. I try not to think of the next idea until I'm
Yeah, because you need to think
finished with
this
this one, but
one,
they sort of get in
the
line as
popping
time
up.
goes on.
You're like, no, 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 wait.
I kind of have an idea for a picture book now, but I'm sort of keeping it outside the door for now. So
So what would you recommend to new authors, somebody who dreamed all their life about becoming a children's book author, and now with this AI revolution, they can feel discouraged to do that?
yeah, I sometimes, I hear from people who are interested in writing, and I think the main thing I see people have trouble with is they like the idea of doing it, um, but they don't actually do it. Like, so, you know, do your research, know what kind of book you're writing. Sometimes they say, I wrote a picture book and it's, 20,000 words, and you go, that's not what those are, or,
Yeah.
and there's a very specific way. So do a lot of research, but
Yeah. Some
mostly
people think that anyone can write the children's books, but it's not true.
it's not
You
true. And people
can,
think,
but it's not
yeah.
going to be a
And I think
book
because they're
children want to
short,
pick up and
and
read.
every celebrity has a picture book out now, whether they've read them or not, who knows?
Yeah.
Um, or even whether they wrote them.
Yeah. That's
But people think, oh, a picture book, it only has 1,000 words. That should be, I can write 1,000 words. But it's very tough to tell a story that's different and unique and means something to people or makes them laugh or makes them cry. I wrote a book. My last picture book was called The Treasure
treasure
Box,
box. Yeah.
and it's very
I was
sad.
about to ask you about it. Yeah.
It's an idea I had for a long time, but it was a very sad idea. And
Yeah, I
you
don't know.
mentioned
There are
that.
many books on this subject out there. I think it's a good
Yeah.
idea to write something like this.
It's about a young girl whose grandfather passes away, and they have a little tradition they do together. It was a sad idea, and I literally had that idea for 15 years and just kept it outside in the waiting line. And then one day it just sort of became the idea I had to write next.
Yeah.
Um, and that book, wasn't that difficult to write, but every word, I mean, you really have to polish and make sure that, it's unique and
Such a
different.
sensitive subject
Yeah.
to address for
It-
children, especially, but it's
yeah.
helpful. It can prepare them for situations
Yes.
like that.
Yeah. It is sad though. That's one of the books, especially when you're working with an illustrator you don't know. Sometimes the books come out and it's fine. But that was a
Yeah, because
particular.
it's not your choice, right? You're not the
Yeah.
one who's picking the.
When I'm the illustrator, I have no one to blame
Yeah,
but myself. So
but the
um,
illustrations are amazing in
the,
this book, Treasure
that book,
Box.
just the pacing and the images in the treasure box, it just came out exactly the way I wanted it to.
Soulful.
This is the treasure box, so I don't know if it.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Thank you.
So really nice, a nice book that came out. So that was a big win, and I think having done that, then I said, well, now I'm going to try to write this bigger, longer book. Um, So, it's been an interesting journey and there's still more to do. So, there's still more books to write and I spent a lot of time writing this book and sometimes I think if I counted up the hours, like I could have been doing something else, but in the end, my wife always says, "Well, you love doing it.
Love it. Makes you happy and
You
brings
kind
you
of
joy.
visit that world in your head and your imagination and it's fun to be there." So it's the joy of the writing for me, meeting other authors. There's try to go see an author reading and speak to the author after. That meant a lot to me to meet people. And I know sometimes people have an image of author as somebody different or special and really they're just regular people. And for some reason, meeting authors who were doing and selling books and being really successful, that made it seem more attainable and like, I can do this, you
And
know.
you're not only meeting other authors, right? But you also meet the kids that read your books.
Yes,
Can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah. So I've luckily I've had a couple of book tours where I've gone to schools all over the country, and one thing you learn is kids are pretty much all the same. They're excited to have someone come to their
Yeah.
school and do break the routine. And I used to do stand-up comedy. So when I was in high school, I did stand-up comedy, and I did it when I was in college as well. But for me, it's like a great chance to have a captive
Yeah.
audience, and they can get squiggly if you get too dull. So I like to keep it fun and kind of goofy, sort
Yeah.
of like a lot of my books.
Sounds exciting.
So that's real fun, and they really it for them. I think it means a lot because they see the person behind the story, and there's people who actually write books. I mean, I think it's sort of abstract who wrote this book or where did it come from, but once you're there and you're answering them questions about how a book comes about, I think it makes a big impression on them. And
I,
uh,
yeah, I think just to keep this culture of reading, because of so many different ways that people and kids, especially nowadays, get their information, watching uh, TV, watching something online.
it's
What if in 10 years nobody reads anymore? That would be very sad. So I think what you're doing is
yeah,
very, very important. It's very inspiring. So maybe
yeah,
after those visits, some of those kids would go home and pick up a book and read. And this is a
yeah, I think
completely
so.
different experience that I feel like it can't be lost.
And sometimes, kids will say, well, what's the best thing about being a writer? And sometimes, especially with that Joe Sherlock series I wrote early on, parents would say, my son has, never read a book in his life. And he was reading it at the breakfast table and he was laughing and giggling. And, I was just like, that's what it's all for. And it really means a lot that, you had that kind of impact on somebody. And, you get a lot of really sweet emails from families who enjoy reading your books together.
Mhm.
That's kind of what it's all about.
Yes.
Those are always really satisfying to hear stories from readers. So I get a lot of nice emails and tell them, thank you for reaching out. If anybody's had a book that's been special to them, don't hesitate to let the author know it or the
People
illustrator.
pass it from generation to generations. Like my son read this book, and then maybe my grandchildren will read it. I have this
Right.
in my library. So this
And
is very
what's great
special.
about picture books, these younger books that you
Mhm.
typically read to young kids, is I miss those days with my own kids where you kind of nestle up and crack open the book and
Yeah.
read a story together. It's really a sweet together time, and
Hmm.
you know
Yeah.
they grow out of that, and that doesn't
Real
happen.
fast. Yeah.
So if you're in those days, that time shared together is still really special.
For parents and for grandparents as well.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
have that connection, that special time with your little ones.
Like I said, we had that book culture in our house and we read quite a few books. So
Time flies
no,
before.
most of my books or some of my books you can find pretty easily in the library. My website is davekeane.net. People can go read about me or see my different books and some of my illustrations there. But like I said, I've been doing this. I I don't know, maybe 21 years. So I've been at it for a long time, and it's probably something I'll do for hopefully another 20 years. And it's something I love doing. And the
Yes.
hardest question I've ever gotten asked when visiting a school is the second grader asked me, why do you write books? And it's a hard question to answer. I don't know why. Like I just feel
That's your
compelled.
calling, huh?
It could be like I like making people laugh. I feel,
Mm.
sort of this drive to entertain people or but it's a hard question. It's just who you are, and it's not always fun or easy. Sometimes there's a lot of disappointment, there's a lot of rejection, but there's
Mm.
also a lot of big wins. When you get that email from a family, that loves reading your book together, and they say, "Dad makes all the funny character voices." I mean, that means a lot. So you have
Yeah.
your wins and your losses, and you just keep moving forward.
Yes, please continue doing this.
I will.
Yeah. And I can't wait to read your book, your latest book about UFOs. This is my favorite subject. Okay, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.